Welcome to the Education Pre-Hospital Care Research Forum Journal Club. Here in our PCRF Journal Club, we promote evidence-based practices by critically evaluating the latest science in emergency medical services. We hope our discussion will help advance EMS practice. Through the generous support of our sponsor, Limmer Education, we can make science more accessible and understandable. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the April 2026 Pre-Hospital Care Research Forum Education Research Journal Club. The PCRF promotes research literacy to advance the science of EMS educational research and clinical practice. So here with the PCRF Journal Club, we take a closer look at some of the latest research happening in medical education. Thank you to Limmer Education for sponsoring these podcasts so we can bring you the best of science in education. I'm Megan Corey, and joining me today is Dr. Ryan Battenhorst from Creighton University. Today we'll be discussing his article published in the Journal of Paramedic Practice, and this is entitled Student Post-Traumatic Stress After Clinical Placement. You can find this and all of our past journal clubs on our YouTube channel. So look us up and at PCRF at UCLA, or just search PCRF Journal Clubs and find both the clinical and the education research monthly recordings on our very own YouTube channel. Now, an important announcement before we get started talking to Dr. Battenhorst. We have from the PCRF the final day to submit an application for the Weinmann Emergency Ventilation Research Workshop. This is a research summit, is April 28th. That's Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. So the summit will be June 8th through 10th in Fort Worth, Texas, and you'll be matched with a group of like-minded EMS researchers and a mentor who will assist you with developing the research question, the methods, the analysis plan for a project. You come with an idea and you leave with an abstract. That's the whole idea behind these. Even if you're just a beginner, never done this before, it's a good time, but everyone is curious, everyone has questions, submit that. Put in your submission, remember, by Tuesday, April 28th. Abstract submissions for the annual PCRF International Scientific Symposium will be June 30th. That is our deadline, as usual, every year. So June 30th, you can submit your abstract, whether it's from this workshop or another workshop, or maybe you have your own data and your own research going on. You can submit through the PCRF website. For this and other information about upcoming opportunities to participate in research, see our website at prehospitalcare.org. All right, so thank you all for listening and joining. Let's begin today. We want to remind you that you can use the chat feature on your screen. You type in questions and comments, and we can bring those into this conversation as we go. We've got a really important topic today, and we are very fortunate to have the researcher on with us, the author of this article, and turns out a researcher who's done some other significant research in this area. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Dr. Ryan Battenhorst. Dr. Battenhorst, first, congratulations on your research and recent publication. Can you introduce yourself and let us know how you got to this point in your research?
Well, thanks so much, Megan. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk about this topic that is really near and dear to me and so important in our profession going forward. So I currently serve as the program director and assistant professor in paramedicine at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. I've been here for about 6 years and sit on numerous boards on the state and national level, and just have lots of different areas of EMS education that I are in those spaces and really enjoy that. So that being said, I got to kind of be part of this with our students, and students seem to struggle a little bit more every year, it feels like, with clinical rotations and things like that. And I have about a 20-year career in the in the field myself, so I have lots of colleagues and lots of people struggling with post-traumatic stress that I know, including several suicides. And that kind of is what started all of it for me is working in the street thinking we've got to figure out something to 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 look at post-traumatic stress and ultimately suicide as an option and things like that. How can we um, create some opportunity for these people that are struggling? And I think first was just to be able to identify that there is indeed a problem and what that looks like.
Yeah, so important. And one of the things I want to recognize is that these are students, and I thought that was so important and so unique about this. So often we think of experienced first responders, experienced nurses, paramedics in the field, and experienced emergency physicians, and the stress of this, cumulative stress of repeated exposures. But I think we can easily forget about the students who are just coming into this field. One question I actually just thought of was, how often, and I think there's been a little research on this, how often are students attracted to this field as a result of some prior stress, a prior incident that led them to this field. And I think there was a little research on that showing that significant number of people come into the field with pre-existing PTSD, and maybe that attracts them to the field, the sense of control they might have or something like that. I'm wondering if that had any influence on why students, why not just people who are experienced out there?
Sure, that's a great question, and yeah, I think that what you said is absolutely part of it. I think students are attracted to this because they experienced it somehow. Whether I mean, most of our applications to come into our university to go to through paramedic education is because in their statement of why is they experience paramedics at their house for their parent or grandparent or et cetera, et cetera. So thought that they felt helpless and couldn't do anything and thought that if they could become a paramedic or even an EMT that they would at least be able to help in those times of need. That being said, the reason I focused on students was because a lot of the stigma associated with post-traumatic stress for clinicians. So I I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I think a lot of the qualitative research that's out there about post-traumatic stress for first responders, people are asked, do you think, are you having symptoms? Are you having this? And the numbers are really pretty low, really. And I wonder sometimes if those numbers are accurate, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
because if you're on the job and you're out there running calls on the fire department and this is your career and people start asking you questions whether or not you're having trouble sleeping or having symptoms, I wonder if people are completely honest about that. Where from my perspective, I thought if we really want to turn the ship a little bit, even 1 degree, I think we need to start with students. And I think this is where students are being
Yeah.
introduced to this and where I think we can if we can first identify there's a problem, and then second, let's start looking at some strategies to how can we address this even before they're out there, so they have some tools in their toolbox to deal with the things that they're going to see for the rest of their career. So
Yeah.
that's really why I focused on students was I think that's the foundation of our career or our profession is the people going through the initial education.
This is, I think, what really attracted me to your research. I've heard you present at a couple of conferences as well. Your dissertation, which this is a piece of a very small piece, probably because a dissertation is a pretty big undertaking of your research and your in your dissertation. But I've been a paramedic program director for 23 years or so, and my first class, my first cohort, I had an incident where a student was at a trauma center on a clinical rotation. And it was brought up to me because the preceptor was concerned that the student didn't want to participate after a certain point in time. And then I addressed the student, and it turned out the student had withdrawn, shut down, because they watched the trauma team and residents of the teaching hospital, after the person died, it was a gunshot wound. After the person died, call in some of the residents to practice a procedure. This is going back 20 something years ago. Come in and practice a procedure. And he was so offended and hurt by that because his brother had died in the same trauma center of a gunshot wound, previously. And it made me think, right there from the beginning, wow, what are we doing to our students in all
Right.
of these things? And I, just sort of felt helpless there. So I know that's got to be the same experience that program directors have, or clinical coordinators, preceptors, when they have new students out there seeing something like this for the first time.
Sure. I think one situation that really has stuck in my brain this whole time, even while I was working on this research and writing this dissertation, was a student that, it was even when I first started here, a student that came to our university to go to paramedic school. And I remember that his dad walked him to class and filmed it like he's a college freshman. This is so cool. I get to film, your first day of paramedic school. And at first we're all kind of like, oh dear, really? This is going to be a long year for this poor student if this is how this works. And so, the reason I say that is not to, say anything bad about the student, but it gives you some perspective of where these kids are in their life.
Yeah.
And, this is an 18-year-old adult or kid, whatever you want to call, that is in this situation and then comes to me a month or two later and says, Dr. Batenhorst, I'm having some issues sleeping and having trouble. Like, okay, well, what's going on? Well, I did my first clinical rotation and I saw a suicide. And okay, well, tell me a little bit more about this. And he kind of talks about it. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. This is part of what we do. How can we help you? And what can we align you with and with the resources our university offers? And he's like, well, the problem was that wasn't the only one. There was two on my first shift. And so, this kid is sleeping in sort of the student areas where there's lights and it's bright at night because he can't sleep in his room. It's too dark. He can't stop seeing it. And, he makes this comment to me that's really stuck with me. He said, it feels like I have this backpack on from this experience that no one else can see, but it's so heavy every day. And I don't know, I'm really worried that if I have to carry this backpack after my first clinical rotation, how heavy will this backpack get if I continue to do this for the rest of my career? And I just was, so surprised by his comment, but also a little bit mortified. Like, okay, well, we're training these people to help others, but we're really not training them how to help themselves. And so that kind of thought was, all right, well, if this student's struggling like this, how many other students are struggling like this? And that's what really the more of the foundation of why I decided to do this one.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So, I think, and again, I think there's a lot of folks that have sort of similar experiences here. We have Edward, who put in the Q&A. I agree with Dr. Battenhorst. Said had colleagues that did not share mental health needs out of fear of litigation. Should a mistake happen on a call, they don't believe they have a safe and confidential way for help. And that's actually something that comes up. I want to turn this and get a little researchy here now and say, where did we go from here? I see we have Dr. Bill Toon coming fresh from the gym joining us. I understand you and Dr. Battenhorst worked together in Kansas City not too long ago, right?
Um, who? Who are you talking about?
Right,
Ryan.
Ryan who? I don't know who you're talking about whatsoever.
right, right.
Yes, he for some reason, I think I'm the reason he left Kansas City is he just couldn't put up with me anymore. But yes, the doc, I think this is the first time I get to call him doctor. Doctor.
Yes, yes.
Perhaps.
So I have a question. Were there baseline assessments
Mm.
done prior to, I apologize if I missed it. Was there a baseline assessment of their mental health baseline or whatever before they went into training?
Just you mean from in our program? Yep. Okay. So no, there was not. There was not any baseline mental health assessment at all.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about people coming into the field with perhaps, some PTSD to begin with. I think when we get into, and let's talk about this research now. We've been mostly talking about the beginnings, what led to this research and what the issues are, and a couple of case studies that just both Ryan and I had about students who highlighted us very early in our teaching careers or program director careers that there's significant impact on students when we send them to a hospital or field rotation. So your research objective stated in this, and then this is again from the article, to investigate the lived experiences of paramedic students who have encountered critical incidents during their clinical education and examine if there's a connection to post-traumatic stress symptomatology. So that's pretty specific. And you answered one of my first questions was going to be, did you draw from personal experience as you developed your research question? And I think the answer is yes. When we talk about where do you go from a research question? So now let's get a little researchy here. If you're out there and you're an educator and you're thinking about research, and in this case, it was your own students, right? It was your students and students at least at your institution, correct?
For the study?
Yes. Oh no,
No,
actually, no, it wasn't your students. Excuse me.
correct.
It
They were
was
not.
your students you were drawing your personal experience from. You did a qualitative, anonymous, open-ended surveys. So
Correct.
when you go to move from research question to what method will I use to address my research question, then you're what makes you think, should I do qualitative or quantitative? Should I do a mixed methods? And I think you had said this was part of your dissertation. So you actually did a mixed methods study, which you've presented at a few conferences, correct?
Correct. So the initial study started off with a comparison to the ACEs score, ACEs tool to evaluate childhood trauma. I initially sort of put together a thought that perhaps high ACEs score, i.e., high childhood trauma, potentially could lower resilience and thus have students have a higher possibility for post-traumatic stress symptomology. In that initial study, that was a mixed method study that had the qualitative survey that was anonymous, but then also the quantitative side of the ACEs scores that we compared. And at the end of the survey, or at the end of the study, there really was no relationship between high ACEs scores and symptomology. So, when we worked together and talked about this as a team, we were trying to find if there's at least something that kind of constitutes to or kind of connects to this symptomology. And we found that potentially, or at least right now, what I can find is that it isn't childhood trauma. So that was kind of the first thought is, well, is this the case? This is what kind of lowers that threshold perhaps? And so from what we found, that is not the case.
And I think that gets to that question earlier that Bill had about the sort of baseline. Where are they at a baseline? And for those out there who may not be familiar, adverse childhood experiences or the ACEs score. This has been studied, for many years, and the original study from I think it was Kaiser Foundation or Kaiser system in Southern California, I believe, was looking at adverse childhood experiences and on health outcomes, and you could see higher incidence of things like diabetes and hypertension and other things that we've always thought, were well, lifestyle kind of things. And it turns out the ACEs scores were pretty pronounced there. So that's the ACEs score. So that was part of the quantitative. But this article that we're looking at today takes the qualitative piece. So this is the qualitative piece using anonymous open-ended surveys. Now, I wanted to ask you a question still about methods. So when you're going to do a qualitative study, let's say you want to get the experiences of paramedics in anything, in intubation and diagnosing stroke. These have all been studies that have been qualitative. Some of them I notice will choose focus group method. Some will choose interview methods, individual interviews, others an anonymous open-ended survey. What made you say, you know what, I'm not going to use focus groups, I'm not going to use interviews, I'm going to use an anonymous open-ended survey?
That's a great question. And initially, it had a lot to do with IRB. So initially, my first, iteration of this was going to be interviewing our students um, and creating a qualitative study from that. Very intrusive, really hard, and for our students to potentially to talk to me about that. I also think, kind of like I talked about in the beginning, that I wonder in some of the, post-traumatic stress symptomology surveys how really honest people are. So, and if I can identify who those people are in a focus group or otherwise, they may be more likely to withhold information if they're struggling. So that's why I chose the anonymous open-ended surveys. Just, it was pretty short. It was 10 questions that I didn't want them to take all day to do this. I wanted it to be really quick so that I would get some good answers that were somewhat substantial, but I didn't want to also dig too deep. I wanted them to just talk about some of their symptoms, and the answers were pretty profound at times.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Now, just considering that the confidentiality and trying to get the honest and open answer is really the goal here, then an
Mhm.
anonymous open-ended survey seems to be the best method to get to that, to what you wanted. So
Sure.
you also, the way you recruited was through getting a list of program directors and first emailing program directors and asking them, telling them what you're planning to do. You'd like to send this survey out to students, and would they be able to do this? So how did you get your list of program directors?
Reached out to COA EMSP to get a list, and got email addresses and sent them out there, uh, and looked at programs similar to ours, and also like university. I wanted to try to sample from different, a university, a community college, fire-based, try to get as much as I could that way to just make it, more random and more not to be one type. Um, and then just put it out there. And of course, this was a dissertation study, so I wanted to just get sort of the first iteration of this and then expand on it with phase two, phase three potentially. So
Mm,
that's why my N is 81, and not 300.
yeah.
So, but the statistics were supportive of where we were at with 81, so that's where we stopped. But that's how I kind of picked. I wanted it to be as random and not as I didn't want to sort of pigeonhole myself into just community college programs or
Yeah.
university-based programs, and wanted to look at all.
So we started with the program directors, and then when they agreed, they provided you with the student information, or the students had to agree. There was an informed consent process through the email, and then they went to answer this anonymous survey. What is purposive sampling strategy when you say in your paper?
So actually, they didn't provide me with the student contact. I asked the program director if they would be interested. When they said yes, I said, okay, well, I will send you the survey and then
Mm,
you send it off to your students. So I can by no means identify the students whatsoever. So, some of the program directors would say, well, I'll send it out and I'll see what I get. And, because he doesn't know or she doesn't know either.
Yep.
And so there was a few that I would send it out again and send it out again up to 3 times and then go from there. So that was what that was. Just that's how I sampled that way.
That's great. Okay, the good to know. So again, if people are out there and they're thinking about doing some kind of research, a lot goes into this. A lot of thought goes into the how you want to get at the highest quality data, but also, the meaning behind the data, and it can affect your analysis and your interpretation of what you get. So this is a list of questions. You had said there were 10 questions, and this is another question I have. So when you develop an open-ended survey, and survey development, there's books on how to develop surveys. So, and then there's validated surveys out there. And I'm sure in the realm of PTSD, there are valid surveys out there. So how did you develop the 10 questions?
That's a really good question.
You're trying to think, I don't want to insert my bias into it. I don't want to
Right.
say, I don't want to lead the person into
Right.
something that I'm already thinking I might find. As a researcher, you're trying so hard to get pure data, knowing that your biases are all behind behind you, pushing you forward.
Right. So some of this, that's a funny question. So some of this was really based on my committee and who I chose for my committee. So my committee, we had two at Creighton, and one's was a PhD. She was my committee chair, who's also a nurse, and well-established, long researcher. The other is a pharmacist who is um, his focus is on wellness and integrated medicine and health integrated medicine, and his program is within the College of Medicine, and so he too is a well established, many authorships in textbooks and regular books and research. And most of these, both he was far more of a qualitative researcher and really good at surveys, and she is more of a quantitative researcher, and hence obviously why I did a mixed methods. It's not true. I really wanted both because I wanted the most information, but it was really great. And I think if you're thinking of doing this research, it really matters to find people that this is part of their expertise. And so I wish I could tell you how many iterations of those survey questions there were, because I would write this and he would send it back to me in the most kind manner and be like, these can't work like this. You're digging too much. You're doing this. This is too pointed, you know, inspire them to want to tell their story, not ask them a question. And that I remember him saying that. I'm like, well, that's what I am doing. He's like, no, you're asking them to kind of give the gory details. Let's talk about what does it feel like and how did it make you feel kind of thing. And focus it on that because then they'll explain it more instead of, and you want them to continue and do the whole survey. So if it becomes too painful in the beginning, then they'll stop. And that's not what you want either. So
Yeah.
be gentle and ask questions for them to describe what does that mean to you. So that's kind of how they came to fruition, but there was quite a few iterations.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think it's interesting because the first few questions here, and Bill's got a question too, are about these situations. But at the end, you throw in like, what could your instructors do? Which I'm really curious about. Bill, I think Bill may be you there?
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
here. I'm here. So my question is after you had felt you'd had your final list of questions, did you pilot the survey to make sure that participants would understand what you're asking and to be able to evaluate how long it would take someone to complete the survey?
that's a great question. I did not pilot it with a group of students. I piloted it with some of our faculty just to run it through them and ask them what they thought. they're not researchers at all. Most of the people that I piloted it with, it wouldn't be, I wouldn't qualify it as real piloting it, but really more about how long did it take you to do this? Do you feel like these covered what we're trying to do? Um, do you feel like they were too intrusive? Do you feel like that was sufficient? Is there other questions I could have asked? And so that was the gist of my piloting.
It's just a way, I think, to strengthen questions in a survey like you did there is that if you find like participants, what you're going to be sending them to,
Hmm.
the two things and this is from past experience, we found the two things that you find out if they really understand what you're asking. And
Hmm.
again, if you use people that are already in the field, have experience like the instructors and everything like that, they already have a greater understanding, and you're looking for the student one. So that's the value there. And then you time them, and these you often pilot these by doing actual interviews, and then you can
Sure.
write responses down. So there's just a great opportunity to strengthen your
Yep.
survey questions. I'm not saying what you did is wrong. Please don't interpret it that way, Ryan. I
Sure.
think it's a
Sure.
way to strengthen.
I agree. I like that. Thank you.
Yeah. Are some of these dependent? I mean, this is listed as, in the article. This is just copied right out of the article. It's a straight list of 10 questions, but some of them are dependent upon the previous answer. So if you answered yes, you would answer the next one. So, um, for example, have you had a stressful or disturbing experience while attending a clinical rotation, either at the hospital or in the field? And then it says, can you describe that experience? They would have had to say, yes, I did have an experience in order to answer the next one. So were
Correct.
they, did everyone see that third question, or was it, were they dependent? I can't remember what you call those questions.
They
Ah,
were dependent. So if
yeah.
they said no, I mean, when I saw the results, I saw that there was people that said no, that
Hmm.
they hadn't had that. But in the dissertation, we still compared it to their ACEs score, but the qualitative data wasn't as robust then because if they said no, then it wasn't.
Exactly. Okay.
Yep.
And then I'm really curious at what, at the bottom you say, so everything makes sense, symptoms. Have you had an experience? Have you had symptoms associated with that experience or health issues? How long, describe them, that kind of thing. How did you cope? But now we have what could your instructors do?
Mhm.
Which I think is a really interesting and appropriate and question. I'm not saying it's not appropriate, it's totally appropriate, but I'm very
Mhm.
curious about that because I think instructors, program directors, clinical coordinators are out there saying, yes, what could we do? So,
Right.
what types of answers did you get to this one?
I think it's really fascinating and also a little bit disappointing, if you will, just because I think a lot of the answers were, um, I don't know what they could do for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, I feel like they care, but I don't, and a little bit goes back to what Bill just said too, about, well, it's, when you're talking to faculty versus students, you have a different lens and a different perspective. And I think the same thing with students here is that they don't know what they don't know. So kind of
Mm-hmm.
that whole backpack, um, theory that I talked about
Analogy.
before is
Yeah.
like, well, I don't know how to ask you to help me. So plus some faculty don't really like, there's an issue with that too. It's like, well, I'm not a therapist. I don't know what to do about this. This is
Mm-hmm.
my comfort zone. So there was some really interesting answers to that of anywhere from I don't know what to do. I feel like my instructors are supportive, but I don't know what to ask them.
Mm-hmm.
I have a therapist or I talk to my friends or family. And some of them felt like maybe it's not appropriate to talk to my instructor about that,
Yeah.
which tells me that maybe it's still a little bit of a taboo thing, even in education. Like, well, this is uncomfortable to talk about, and what does this look like? So, I think just the whole point of what I'm getting at here is the fact that it's still kind of vague to where
Yeah.
they're like, I don't know what to ask. I don't know what to say. Kind of tells me that maybe we're not teaching them or talking to them about what to look for and what is normal and what is part of, post-traumatic stress symptoms, and what does that even just stress itself look like?
But yeah, and as long as we have faculty that say, well, some people aren't cut out for this, then we might still have some people not willing to talk about
Right.
about things. Maybe they're fear, there's a fear about it. So
100%.
so moving on to the themes, and that's the reason I brought that specific one up, is because it doesn't come out in your themes. It doesn't, the whole what can faculty do for me, what can the school do for me, what can, it doesn't appear.
Right.
So what walk us through what you found in your theme. So you did coding, and we've talked about coding a little bit on this, the type of coding you did. This was and actually you have a descriptive phenomenological approach to analysis. I've heard phenomenological before. We've talked about it, but what does that mean?
Well, really more for me, I just mostly did, I wanted them to talk about the situations, and I wanted them to discuss kind of the phenomenon of what they're experiencing. And then I hand coded it to walk through and look at trends and what this looked like. And really, the issue with the instructor interactions was really that it was either that I didn't know what to say, or, well, I didn't really bring it up to them.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't really fit under symptoms, or it didn't really, there wasn't enough of it to really to emerge as a theme.
Yeah,
Really a
exactly.
lot more interested in talking about, you should see what I saw kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that was the other thing that was interesting that emerged, and I don't mean to pivot here from your question, but the interactions with professional conflicts and interacting with other professions was also something that kind of, and I saw that a few different times and was like, well, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Because think about, why do we focus EMS education on interprofessional or interdisciplinary type things? And here's a perfect example of why we need to do that. People they don't understand EMS, they don't know the difference between an EMT and a paramedic, and these are people that we're working with every day, and are, can be degrading and things like that on scenes. And these students, that was one that kind of slapped me upside the head, if you will, because I didn't even think about that being stressful, of a student thinking, well, this physician thinks like we're not very intelligent, and we don't know what to do. And maybe this isn't the right thing for me to do. Maybe I want to be something different. And
Mm-hmm.
that was really interesting to me.
Yeah. So yeah, let's move out of the specifics on methodology and onto the actual themes, which you're doing now, which I think is great. The whole challenging, the first theme, stressful and disturbing experiences. The first part of it didn't surprise me, with reporting some really traumatic and disturbing things, and
Sure.
honestly, I got a little stressed reading it, of familiarity from working in the field with certain
Sure.
things. So warning, when you read some of the comments, they'll resonate with you from your work in the field out there. The high stress situations, life and death scenarios didn't surprise me. The challenging interactions and professional conflicts didn't surprise me, but it's something I think that's underappreciated about what causes someone to have a stress reaction after a call that went bad. We always call them went bad. And went bad, oftentimes we think it's the patient that went bad, and sometimes
Mhm.
it's just the situation that was
Right.
bad. Whether it was, the call that was, it's not so much the outcome of the patient, or even sometimes the mechanism, but the scene itself went bad, with people who were, equipment that didn't work, and you feel like an idiot, and someone else who makes you feel like an idiot, or whatever. Or that going to the hospital and having someone say something to you after you've transported a child from a not so great scene where things didn't go right, and now you're being reminded that you are not, that didn't, I think that really resonated too. the challenging interactions and professional conflicts. They did say, you did say something about hierarchies though too, which I thought was interesting. Professional hierarchies, and I guess that means, it could mean doctor, nurse, paramedic. It could also mean on the scene, whether there
Right.
were, we had MD on the scene. You have too many medics not moving the process. Stressful due to the preceptor. So there's multiple aspects to those comments. Yeah, these were pretty powerful comments. And then the impact on personal well-being that went with this. So these are the sub themes that are, and in the article, I would encourage people to read this article. It's open access. You see the some of examples of some of the quotes that illustrated these sub themes. Let's see, there was, I like the way you put that they shaped how the responders process the realities of emergency medicine. That I think that's really important, shaped their careers, basically.
For sure. It just it was really fascinating to see some of the things that they were saying. And I think one of the other things that I didn't really think about until, like all of us who do research, it's always something that you're like, why didn't I consider that? That was silly of me. But I don't think I fully appreciated enough how much stress is involved in just being a student being evaluated by a preceptor. We think, all right, well, you're
Yes.
in your internship, you should be ready to go by now. This is your capstone. You're in a team lead situation. Now, if you happen to be with the same crew every day and those people are familiar to you, that might help a little. But if you're not, which is most places aren't able to do that or to accommodate that, you start that whole process over every morning. And I think we really underestimate what that means to be evaluated on top of seeing things that you've never seen before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that
That's
was
a
kind of
great
interesting.
point. Yeah, a really great point. The second theme here, symptoms experience. Now we're getting into what this was a theme. So that means there was some significant repetition in what the
Yeah, there was
respondents were saying.
lots of things about I couldn't sleep. There was, I just felt stressed. I felt angry. I felt, I needed to sort of numb and do things like that. That it just felt it disrupted my daily functioning. And, kind of back to that whole backpack thing of,
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that was interesting to me that was so frustrating to them was that they have this big heaviness that they're carrying around that no one else can see, which
Yeah.
I thought that was a really interesting thing that I heard not only in this research, but also from our students that say that a lot, that, it's
Mm-hmm.
glaring in my face all day long, every day, and no one else can see it.
And in your paper, you talk about how you didn't use, when you did coding, you did this sort of organic kind of method of coding, which is
Mhm.
that phenomenological approach. You specifically said I didn't use existing PTSD, um, theory to look for certain patterns, but it certainly came out in this section. These
Yep.
are all established in PTSD literature: behavior changes and coping mechanisms, trouble sleeping, disruption of daily function, trouble sleeping, continuous intrusive thoughts. I mean, that the minute I started reading that, you really didn't need to follow anything. It came out of this data.
Which I'm so glad you brought that up because that's was something that else was super interesting to me is, when I talked to my colleague that was, part of my dissertation committee, I said, and this was in the beginning, this is what I want to do. I don't have formal education in psychology. I don't have, mental health licensure or anything like this. I want this to focus more on well-being and more organic rather than more wellness versus psych type thing, because there's plenty of mental health research out there, but I wanted it to pivot a little bit away from, more wellness and things like that, as opposed to, just more research to support what post-traumatic stress research already says.
Hmm.
And also, then maybe butting up against research in people that are experts in that area. I just wanted to look at a different area, more wellness focused. And it's interesting that you say that because that's exactly what we found, that the data that emerged is supports both sides of it. It doesn't really matter. It's the same stuff.
Yeah, and that was especially clear under the section on theme two. I
Hmm.
thought was especially clear. The theme one, just one other comment that's made under theme one that I think is really important. You bring it back up in discussion section about developing professional identity is this idea that the effects of their experiences can sometimes blur the boundaries between professional and private spheres. And I thought that was really powerful because, again, we're talking about something if, in any other profession, how much are you bringing home that isn't related to interpersonal things that happen at every job? That's related more to the job itself. And I thought that was really important and may have something to do with relationships outside of the field, and how
Right.
people can hold up to there. And this gets to kind of coping strategies too.
Hmm.
These are the coping strategies that were mentioned: seeking social support, physical activity, and self-care. I really appreciated that some people used exercise, distance running, exercise, attempts to regulate body and mind in the aftermath. But there's a section here on reflection and self-awareness. And I thought it was so important because I always think of Kim McKenna when we talk about reflective practice, when we want to encourage students in metacognition and reflection and that kind of thing. But in this case, it's not always in ways that promote healing. So I thought that was interesting. And I'm wondering if you can did that sort of surprise you too? Is like, wow, this is reflection, but it's not always in the direction of healing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too that you bring that up because some of the reflection that they talked about wasn't necessarily about reflecting to sort of work through it, but really reflecting on how things were bad and how things and continue to reflecting on the negative parts of this rather than using reflection to sort of work through it as a process. Um, and kind of what I mean by that is I have some colleagues that talk to me about, I would come home from shifts and just sit in my driveway and reflect through every single call I ran that day and process them and then be done. And I think when you're a student, you don't know how to do that yet. You're still
Mm-hmm.
reflecting on, well, oh my gosh, what does my preceptor think of me? And oh my gosh, that was a horrible thing to see. And oh my gosh, what is my preceptor thinking of me? And I mean, it just goes into all of this. And oh, by the way, how am I going to pay my rent and everything else,
Yeah.
which was also interesting to me.
Yeah, and the stoic mindset, acknowledging that this is just a harsh reality of the field. I work in healthcare, it comes with the job. I just had to push those thoughts to the side and push ahead. That's part of the job.
Yes.
And I think they're probably hearing and seeing that too from whether it's faculty and instructors or just people working in the field for a long time, kind of if you can't cut it sort of thing, or it's, this is just part of the job. Um, it's still disturbing to see that because it doesn't mean there shouldn't be something more productive in that reflection than well, I guess this is part of the job, because we know, again, going back to what your student had so clearly said about the weight of the backpack and loading the backpack and how heavy is this backpack going to get. It just stacks up until something happens. And it's so how to unload that backpack is probably an important piece of this.
Well, I think one thing to add to that is really interesting to me, and the backpack analogy really sort of reinforces that, is I think until we can look at post-traumatic stress or these symptoms as an injury rather than a disorder that you can recover from,
Mm,
that I think students, I mean, just the thought that well, I have this backpack on that, how heavy is this going to get? If you hurt your ankle or hurt your back, you don't think of it like that. You think of, well, okay, I'm out of work for a couple weeks while I get rehab or something like that so that I can get back and ready to go. Where this, people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to really elaborate on it because, I just got to figure out how to handle this backpack that continues to get heavier and heavier and heavier.
Yeah. Bill, did you have something to
I
add
did.
or a question?
Yeah, only because I know we're beginning to get to the end of our time here. So I failed to mention this before, Ryan. It's exciting to see someone who's doesn't consider themselves a researcher to make that step out and then to allow your paper to be published. And there's goods and bads to the publishing. People say, "Oh, this is wonderful and great," and then other people says, "I think you missed the mark." And it's very brave when someone takes that step. So congratulations on doing that, publishing it, and getting the success out of it. And I want to make sure I acknowledge that for you because I think that that's really important.
Thank you very much. I
So
appreciate
one of the things that I think that you bring out in here, and you and I have never had a chance to sit and dive into this in depth, something we can do offline because I know you're going to want to do some more research on this topic area and publish some more. So since you have a great basis, hint, hint.
Right.
So by doing this, you actually are hypothesis generating for future studies, which are
Mhm.
really good. So I just want to talk about a personal experience, and it's ancient. I want to make sure everyone understands it's ancient history. But when I ran a paramedic program, I ran across some similar problems I noticed in students. And what reared its head is the day I received a phone call from the head nurse in the emergency department and says, "I think your student that here is drunk." And luckily for me, my office is upstairs, and I just have to come down and make the assessment and be able to pull the student. They had already isolated the student from patient care at that point, but it was a chance for me to talk a little bit hands-on with the student and make them aware that we have some concerns. But before I dug into any depth, I called the employee assistance program, and I had a relationship with them, and they took the student right in and took care of everything that way. Then it made me think, I says, why am I waiting for a problem to arise when we can do this in advance? So we took all the wellness and health and anything that existed in the old curriculum, and we moved it up into the second week of the training program, even before they got into anything else. And we found out the hospital, because it was a hospital-based program, would grant students access to the EAP program as being students of the hospital. And we did all sorts of training at the beginning through EAP. No one from the program sat in those training program classes. Not that we didn't get our own training as supervisors and as educators and stuff, but we wanted the students to develop that relationship with the EAP program. So we brought EAP right at the beginning of the program. And EAP, and again, didn't collect information. It just seemed like the right idea to do this. But I know through the course of the years that were left, all our students had access to EAP, could be utilized at any time, and we were only notified if the student, again, was a question of danger, harm to anyone else, or patients in particular that would require them to be suspended from the program or removed from the program for some hideous or horrendous type thing. And then train the staff, the preceptors, to know that EAP is available for anyone, so they could direct these people to EAP after a bad shift or anything like that. So we tried to become preemptive about the whole thing because there was something going on. It wasn't as eloquent as your study or anything like that, but it was just, to me, made sense. So that was the way we tried to address it. So I have tons of ideas about where you might want to think going down the road here, but it would be very interesting to know, what do accredited paramedic programs do right now? What are they doing right now, knowing that your study says there is an issue out there? Are they aware there's an issue? Do they do anything about the issue? Do they have access to these other services for their students? So just beautiful work that was done. I think it's now generating many, many more questions in my mind that you can go forth and get done with this or collaborate with other people to make something happen. But it that's what I love about research. It often makes us want to know more. And that's listening to this whole thing. What I've read in what you did is I want to know more and I want to know how to correct it. I want to get it out in front because I think we need to get ahead of the curve, with our students to help them be better practitioners in the field and to have a healthier mental health as they go through the thing, to build their resiliency so they'll be successful in their careers.
100%. Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Bill Toon, you got lots of thumbs up on your comments, and especially around the having EAP come in initially, and what a great research question you mentioned too, about what are accredited paramedic programs doing now, especially since there is a standard on safeguards and fair practices. It would be really interesting to see what our programs currently doing and where could they use help in addressing things.
So can I mention just quickly what
Absolutely.
we did about that? So one of the things that from this research, we've put together a few different things of kind of dovetailing off what Dr. Toon said was, one, we added this stuff to our Intro to Paramedicine course, which is the first, like he talked about, where we bring people from the university in to talk about what resources are available, similar to EAP. And we put together focus groups where we could get together with students and sit with them. And, obviously none of that, the focus group stuff or support groups is really, it's not mandatory or anything like that because you can't mandate that. That said, most of them, when we talked about that, none of their topics were about the calls. It was mostly about how they're struggling in their life. And I think that creates the more likelihood of having more stress when you're doing calls and things like that. If you're having trouble paying your rent,
yeah,
that's cumulative. And then lastly, we added a course during our internship that's called Transition to Practice, which is one thing that while they're doing their capstone, it's like, how have you had a call that was challenging from a cultural perspective or had a call that you've had a leadership issue or interdisciplinary problem, some of the things that emerged in our themes about, and how did you address that or how did you approach that? And so rather than, I always felt like it's weird. They're in their internship, they're getting done. We sort of pat them on the back and wish them the best of luck and hope everything went well. Where I think this is a way for us to look at and measure that there has been some emerging of some strategies of how to address stress as a student. So
yeah, and this is thank you for highlighting that, because it must be difficult. You're doing this research and you're seeing these results, and you're also a program director and you have these students, and now it's almost compelling you. How can I read these results and not at least try to do something about it? Which I think that is a weight on you as well. Talk about a backpack to wear.
Sure.
And that's under the key points in the article. The very last one is the findings suggesting this need for structured trauma-informed educational interventions. So I think that's something, it's a logical next step of what are we going to do next? What are people doing, and what is done in other areas too? We have to remember there's other fields out there of high stress, that may have similar things. What are they doing and what are the successes so that someone can have a balanced and productive and happy life?
For sure. For sure.
Yeah. Okay. Any other items that we've left off that you'd like to include for us?
I think one last comment was, and one of the really inspirational things that my committee told me is said, you've come across some data here that is pretty moving. And they said, I want you to consider for a minute as a program director, one, but really as an educational program or a president of a university, that we have programs on campus that are knowingly mentally injuring our students and not doing anything about it. So what is it? What does that inspire you to do as one, a program director and an educator, but also as a researcher? And how can we move forward with that? And, does that also open doors to, like you've said all throughout, Megan, of, well, if paramedicine students are having this issue, what about nursing? What about medicine? What about dentistry? What about law school? All of it, it's not just us. So I think it opened up a whole, I don't like to use the word can of worms, but I think it inspires us or challenges us to look at how do we protect our students' mental health.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks so much for that. And thank you so much for being here and talking about your research. Thank you, Dr. Bill Toon, for contributing into this discussion, making us all go away thinking harder and more. Thank you. Look at him in his beautiful Arizona area. All right, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. Join us next month. Remember, we're going to be on the 5th Friday, in May, 1 week later, because May is a long month, at 10 a.m. Pacific, noon Central. And we're going to be in New Orleans. We're going to be live from AccreditCon. And we're going to be looking at the prevalence and impact of simulation substitution on paramedic educational program success, a national examination. This is a collaborative between the National Registry and the COA EMSP. Our next pre-hospital care research forum clinical journal club, though, will be Monday, May 11th with Dr. Remley Crow and Dr. Tony Fernandez and others. So remember to join us live each month. You can register at prehospitalcare.org. And don't forget, you can find us on our YouTube channel where you can rewatch this and look at other episodes. And I just see Jamil Silvio is here. Hi, Jamil, who is also interested in mental health of professionals and done a little bit of research there too. So thanks everyone for joining us. We will see you next month and take good care.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. We hope you have enjoyed and learned from this PCRF Journal Club. Please share it with other interested EMS professionals. An archive of past journal clubs can be found at www.pcrfpodcasts.org. You can also find us on Facebook at PCRF at UCLA and on our website at www.prehospitalcare.org. A special thank you to our sponsor, Limmer Education, providing education tools for success at every stage of your EMS journey.